develop it. And the third thing that I think about tropes is that they're really a promise to the reader. And why I think it's so important, that's so important, is that we don't want to put tropes in our stories that we aren't going to develop. Like the biggest concern I have is enemies to lovers is so popular in romance. A lot of times people are like, I can't write a story that doesn't have enemies to lovers in it, so I have to put that in there. And they put it, but they don't really have an enemies to lovers trope in their story to develop. So we want to make sure that we're putting the tropes in our story that we're going to actually develop and show our readers. Another example of this on the personal level is I love the twin trope. And what I love about twin trope is, for me, there's an inherent promise in there that they're going to swap identities. And this is probably all because I was a huge fan of Sweet Valley High and the other one with the girls at the summer camp, which I can't think of the name right now, but that's been remade a couple times. And I'm always surprised when I read a twin story of what any genre, if they're identical twins and they don't have them swap. I'm like, well, what's the point? So you want to like make sure you're paying attention to what the inherent value of the trope is, what the trope is promising to the reader. And then the other thing that I didn't write in there is that, I have it right here, is that really tropes are relationships. And I think that's why we see so many stories of, say, orphans, right? Because this orphan is a vulnerable being who's going to go on a journey or relation and have a whole bunch of other adventures and relationships along the way. But they're almost like this little plain block that's going to pick up a whole bunch of like Legos that stick to it along the way, or like lint. And so relationships are really how we show our story conflict. If you've ever had like an idea for a story and then you're like, oh, but how do I develop it? Tropes can help us do that, because that they're giving us their inherent ways that we can build our plot and our characters. Tropes have been around a super long time and we find them everywhere. I think this is really important to me. Sometimes people think, oh, tropes are only in like genre fiction. But if you go back and you look at fairy tales or folklore, or my favorite is I still love to read literary fiction. There's tons of tropes in there. It's just that they're developed in a way that you aren't immediately like, oh, this is the X trope. Good tropes really go for that relationship, like I said, and then they just develop it until you're just like, oh, I want to know what's going to happen next. So tropes aren't anything new. They've been around for really, I think, as long as we've had human interaction, because of them being about relationships, and you see them everywhere. And I've started saying lately that I actually see them in advertising ads, like on TV, where they're trying to like tell a little story in this short frame of time. So this is really important. I don't feel that a trope and a cliche are the same thing, and I'm going to tell you why. So I think a cliche or stereotype has a negative meaning attached to it, and it's not a fully developed idea. So I gave you some examples here, like the dumb jock, the dumb blonde, and the gold digger. So you could, write a story about a jock who could have any athlete who has any kind of other issues that can just be part of that character. But they don't have to be this like flat character in this particular way. It makes them much harder to develop, I think, when we use a cliche or stereotype. So that's why I don't think they're the same. And I really avoid, trying to do I just try to avoid stereotypes or cliches, and really go for like, how can I make my character as rounded and like a real person as we all are? The other thing that's really important about tropes, like I alluded to before, is they play very well with others. So you're really not going to just have like tropes in your story and that's it. You need to pair them with what are the genre expectations. And when we talk about genre expectations, what we mean by that is, what do readers want or expect? So my example of the twin, using the twins trope and not having, any kind of hidden identity or swapping of identities, that's a reader expectation. And, often when you do have twins, it is in like something that has like a mystery or thriller element, or the romance where there's a reason why you have those things happen. I love this slide. This is just super general, but I think it's important to think about what are the questions that the genres are asking that we as storytellers need to answer. And my favorite stories are not just one thing. So it's not just a mystery, or it's not just a horror. They'll have multiple of these things mashed up together. A great example of of a mashup that I give is my friend. She's my friend, but she's also a great writer, Steph Green or Stephanie Holmes, same person. She writes a really great series where she has taken cozy romance and a cozy mystery, excuse me, and mashed it up with steamy Why Choose romance. And so she's taken, these couple subgenres and put them together and created a very successful, really popular, really fun to read series. So it's really neat to see how there's different ways we can keep reinterpreting these ideas. But important to realize when you're working on your story that you're like, the big question is being answered in the end. I don't want to read a mystery and not find out who did it and if they were punished or not, or what happened to them in the end. And it's very important that romance does have some happily ever after, or have happily ever after for now. That's what romance readers expect. You can have stories where the whatever relationship doesn't wind up satisfactorily in the end, but that wouldn't be a romance. That would be, another kind of fiction. It could be a woman's fiction if it's focused on her journey, or it could be on one of the other subgenres, but you wouldn't call it a romance if one of the characters dies of cancer or somebody cheats on somebody else in the end. And I tell you that just to save you getting lots of angry reviews for your stories. So think about what the story question is, and then we'll work on how that mashes with tropes. And the way I'm going to talk about that is to give you an example of talking about The Witcher. There's so many great books out there. It's hard to find examples that everybody's pretty familiar with, but I think The Witcher has been big enough in our culture that even if you didn't watch it, you have a sense of what it's about. I really recommend the first season because I think they do a great example of tropes in it, of developing tropes with characters and plot. And there's just a lot of really great storytelling in it, and they play with the time sense in it. You're not really sure exactly what the order is. It's not super linear. So it's very much making you lean in and what's going to happen next. So, The Witcher. We're going to talk about some things with tropes and goal, motivation, and conflict. And I'm just going to give you, because this is such a huge story, it's the first season I think honestly it would be easier to pick out a few tropes it didn't have, and I'm not sure what those are off the top of my head, but these are all tropes that are in the first season of The Witcher. Now, they're not all like tropes that are like we don't meet a character and they spew out our tropes at you. They're like, some of them are big tropes, like the whole idea of Ciri being the orphan and the Witcher trying to find her is a very big arc for that story, and we can see several tropes that work with that. And then we have other smaller tropes that are used for like the side characters or side quests, or that are just like kind of little seeds for future things. So how the tropes are developed is as important as just having them in the story. But the great thing about a big sweeping kind of epic saga like that is that you have so many cool tropes in there. Okay, so now we're going to talk about goal, motivation, and conflict is like the third part of the wheel of how we get all these things to work together. Deborah Dixon wrote this book by this title, probably, 20, 30 years ago at this point. And when I had read it, I was like, yeah, I get it, but I didn't really get like how to use it. And it wasn't until I was doing this work with tropes that I realized, if you pair tropes with goal, motivation, and conflict for developing your characters, it really helps. So we're going to talk about how that's done in The Witcher. So the one thing I think that's really important about goals is that they're meaningful and measurable. And what do I mean by that? I mean that goals by meaningful, it means to be something that is not easily solved for the character. It's not like I need, a new shirt, or I need to go out for a latte. It needs to be something that's like a major life-changing event for the character. And measurable is super important because this is something that helps us have a way to plot our story, and we in the story as readers or experiencing the story can see how are they making progress to the goal. The characters themselves aren't always conscious of it, but it helps us understand, oh, okay, they're working towards something. And that's why we see so many stories where there's like, oh, somebody inherits a house, or, there's some kind of inheritance and there's some kind of quest, they need to find something, or, there's some big event at the end, because it gives us a sense for the story of how it can develop. It has a sense of urgency and time and a way that we know. Sometimes when I work with romance, newer romance writers, they'll be like, oh, well, I just want him to like be in love. But if you actually try to plot a story with two characters to be in love, it's pretty darn hard, because what are you going to have them do? So having, one want to run for office and the other one wanting them to be sure they lose because they're managing their best friend's campaign, like that gives you some measurable conflict for then how you could have these characters interact. So in The Witcher, back to The Witcher, Geralt's goal is to find and protect the princess. This is very important for him as a character, because he's somebody who's very solitary, but yet he's made this promise, and protecting the princess from all the harm that's going to come to her. Doing the goal, motivation, and conflict, I'm only going to talk about it for Geralt because of time here, but when I'm writing a story, I will do the goal, motivation, and conflict for all the main characters, particularly the antagonist, super important, and any significant side characters that are going to reoccur. Doing goal, motivation, and conflict isn't something that I sit down and do like I'm writing on a grocery list. I will do a goal, motivation, and conflict, and I keep revising it while I'm working on the story, because I'm still figuring out what's important to the characters and how we can make their journey as difficult as possible. Motivation is our story's why, or the theme of the story. So we usually want to have, that's usually something that comes to me as I'm working through it. It's not like I sit down and like, oh, I'm going to write a story about like identity. It's the as I'm working in the story, I'm like, oh, that's what his motivation is. Okay, that makes sense. And in this story, The Witcher, his motivation is he's bound by the law of surprise, which is a wonderful world building element that they've added in the story. If you haven't watched it, I highly recommend it. But that's why he has to do it, is that he's a man of honor, even though he doesn't really necessarily want to. And conflict is really, when we talk about goal, motivation, and conflict, we want to have our goals and our conflict in as much opposition as possible. So he's trying to find this character, or he's trying to find Ciri, the young woman, and she's the princess, and she's being hidden from him by the queen. She's escaped into the wilds, and antagonists are hunting her. So he doesn't even know that he's looking for a female when the story begins. There's all these more powerful people that are chasing her, and she has a power that they want to harness that could bring down the kingdom. But it's like a huge conflict, right? It's not a small conflict. It's just a really, really, really big conflict that will affect him and the world around them. Okay. The other thing I'm going to just talk to you a little bit about what some of his character tropes are. So like I referred to before, he's a loner, he's an orphan, and he's a protector and a warrior. And we see different elements of those characters' traits as the story develops. And we also he has different relationships. So found family is, I think, just a super important trope that we find in every story. But in this story, it's like that sense of, as he's going on his journey, he's going to pick up people along the way, as I alluded to before. And so he ends up getting a minstrel who accompanies him, and he ends up meeting a powerful sorceress and falling in love with her. And so that would be like the fated mates, opposites attract. He's Ciri's guardian, and then all together they kind of come together to form, like I said, this found family. Scars and secrets are just huge tropes that we can see. It doesn't matter what genre you're talking about, you're going to have scars and secrets. And this character, Yennefer, his love interest, is a very powerful sorceress, and she has wonderful scars and secrets. She has a great progression of ugly duckling, where she's, as you see in the first picture, she's physically born with all these deformities, and then through the use of magic, she's, becomes incredibly gorgeous. But the great little twist with that is when when she goes through that transformation, she loses her ability to be a mother and have children. And so her story is always trying to get back what she lost. She would like to be able to have a child. But think about, really, all of your characters should have some kind of scar or secret. It's really the storytelling goal of helping provide motivation, make them more interesting, give them different connections, things they want to hide. I just really love scars and secrets. Okay, there's two questions that I normally get asked, so I'll answer those. One question I get is people want to know which tropes to use. And I mentioned before about found family, but I really believe that I keep seeing these 4 tropes in any kind of story that I read. Doesn't matter the genre. And I'm just going to walk you through these. So forced proximity is very much the idea of they're stuck in the same place. We think of that sometimes as like, stranded on an island. Romance, sometimes it's, they're stuck in a hotel with one bed, or an office, or an academy setting. That's, all those books where they have kids taking, the Harry Potter thing where they're in the magical academies, or Hunger Games, where they're all in a condensed area. So any books usually have something where you're forcing the stories have something where you're forcing the characters to interact. And why that's important, that in parentheses I have the role that the trope plays. So for forced proximity, it's adding pressure to the story. And then after that, I put stress and excitement, and that's kind of like the emotions generated by your story. Found family is the role of that is creating community for your story, and belonging is what the emotion there. Ticking time bomb, high stakes. Ticking time bomb is so important. It doesn't have to literally be a bomb like we see in obviously all the thrillers and things like that. It could be an upcoming wedding. It could be a pregnancy. It could be like an inheritance, a job, any kind of change where there's a deadline at the end that you can put more pressure again in the story. And usually the great thing about the ticking time bombs is they generate anxiety. And then ugly duckling, I think about those really is in a very general, broad way of making sure, has my character undergone a transformation in the story? So they're not, at the end of the story, they're not the same person. They've been massively changed by whatever has happened. And usually this involves love or hate. If you're romance, you're going to be talking love, but obviously in mystery and thriller, there's often a lot of, negative emotion that the characters have gone through. So I would go back and look at your stories and think about, do I have these in my story in some way? It's well, as we'll talk about, it's particularly useful when you're writing blurbs and working on promos. The other question I get asked is, can I use too many tropes? And I actually think it's not a question of number, it's a question of development. So I have a free, all my Substack stuff is free, but over on Substack, I have an article that I wrote that talks about the first, oh my gosh, I'm losing the name of the title, the dragon one. First 11, there's 11 tropes in the first 3 pages, and it's the big fantastical dragon story, which is loot. I'll stick it, I'll find out a way to get it to you guys. But anyway, if you go check out my Substack at Trope Talks, you'll see, at Trope Talk, you'll see it in there. And why I think this is important is Fourth Wing. There it is. I got it. It is in the beginning of Fourth Wing, that author has seeded a minimum of 11 tropes in those first 3 pages that will be developed to different varieties throughout the story and throughout the series. And so it doesn't have to be you don't have to just tell me all the tropes on the first page and that's it. You want to develop some tropes. I'll find out midway through, like scars or secrets. Usually those are tropes we start to learn more halfway through the story, but it's really a matter of how much you're going to develop it. You don't have to have, everything doesn't have to be if you're cooking, it doesn't have to be a really big flavor. Some things can be just used in smaller amounts. So I don't have a definitive answer to give you, but I just want you to be aware of, it's really more a question of development than number. How do we build tropes in marketing? I alluded to a little before about those 4 elements that I really think are important that you see, that you can use in your blurbs. And with, if you've done, I'm sure you guys are aware, but a lot of books now, they have the cover in social media, and then they'll have like their tropes that they're like with arrows pointing to them, and you'll see them in ads. So it's really good to like know what your popular tropes are in your story and how you can hook your readers' attention. But like I said, I really think those 4 are really great for doing that. Danica had a talk yesterday where she was talking about keywords and categories, metadata. Go check that out. That is really important, where she's going to be talking about how to use tropes in there. And blurbs, really there's really great. Go to look at your favorite authors and see how do they tell their stories with blurbs and how do they use tropes. And ads and social media, again, it's really, our readers now are so savvy about tropes. It's amazing how that's changed, like in the last 5 or 6 years, where before you would never have a story where all these tropes are called out, and now it's like everybody's doing it. And I think it's because of TikTok and social media, and Netflix now. And I watch something, they're like, oh, you like this story, what do you want to watch these stories next that have these couple tropes in there? So it's really a way of having a language in shorthand that we're using to talk to with our readers to get them excited about our work. So I hope that if anything you guys come away with, to think of tropes have so much potential for us in storytelling, that they're relationships and that they bring conflict. And that's really the secret sauce of what they can add to all of our things. Trope twisting is like a whole other cool topic, but I wanted to just mention it here because a lot of people are like, oh, I need to learn how to twist tropes. I can't. It's important to understand what kind of story are you telling. You might not need to twist tropes. You might just need to use your trope and develop it, but that doesn't have to be twisting. Twisting tropes are something that you have to really understand what the trope is about, and then you're going to play with those expectations. So places that we see trope twisting, I think, are a lot in horror, because there's like, I just love horror anyway, but a great example of trope twisting, I think, is in What We Do in the Shadows. It's a mockumentary about vampires. And so there's tons of tropes in there, but it's just a great example of giving you surprises, but it's not what you would expect, because it's taking your expectations and twisting them. There's lots of people that just want to read well-developed stories with tropes, like want to read stories with best friends who become lovers, or want to read stories about a detective, vigilante detective like Dexter, who's bent on, justice in his own way. So it's trope twisting is something that definitely you can do, but it's not the only way to use tropes. And this is just my little graphic that I hope you guys think about if you get stuck with your story, of where you can go and how you can get unstuck. And that's kind of what I think the beauty of tropes is. It can help you when you're like, okay, I need to do something else. What do I need to do? Do I need to know the character better? What other elements are in their personality that I haven't explored? And thinking about that goal, motivation, and conflict, and the genre expectations. This is just a little bit about how you can track me down. If you want more information, through my website. I'm working on the mystery and thriller Trope Thesaurus now with Sarah Rosette, who's a mystery author, and I'm just thrilled because she's an amazing lady. That'll probably be out early next year. And I hosted the Trope Conference this last spring, which was just so much fun. You can still, everything is all online, and you can still purchase that. And I'm going to do another one next year. And feel free to follow me on my newsletter, or track me down through my website. So I'm going to go back. And okay, now whatever questions you guys have, I don't know how, if the moderators, should I scroll back through, or what you guys are, I haven't been looking at the chat when I was doing my, okay. Let me just go back here and see what, somebody asked a question. Leon. Yes. Oh, the slides are not fitting the screen. Ugh. Okay. I'm going to, yes, I'm going to put I will take this whole presentation, and I will put it on this channel, and make it available to you guys by the end of today, because then I will have to redo it again. I'm really sorry about that. always technical glitches. But yes, they will be available if you subscribe to this channel. You should be able to get it. And then I'll figure out if there's a way I can also add it to the AWC. So thank you, Rachel, for telling me about that. Okay, Leon asked me a question. How do you gauge the potency of a trope in your story? Is it a subtle seasoning or defining element? What's the key effectively integrating tropes without letting them overshadow the narrative? Okay, so well, I think you need to think about who you're, like, I believe stories need to be very character driven, the whole idea of complex characters, simple plot. So I usually try to think about what are the elements that drive my characters, and I usually think about at least 3 tropes to help me do that. And then I can like play with developing those. The subtle seasoning or defining element, that's more like where your artistry comes in. There's not like a formula I can give you for that. It's just kind of like you want to have enough tropes in the story so that readers know what's going on, and so that they can feel like, okay, I can follow this story without having to like really get bogged down in lots of like world building or rules or things like that. And then kind of, but the great thing about tropes is that because you get to develop them how you want, taken as long as you understand the basics of it. Like I said, with like loner or twin or revenge or jealousy or bride, like you understand the essential idea of it, and then you can develop it how you want. So I can't give you like a very concrete answer about that, other than read lots of books that you admire, watch lots of movies and shows, and think about how are they using tropes, how are they putting together. That's really the best way as storytellers we learn, is by studying other people. Let's see. Okay, that was Leanne. Somebody asked, oh, so what do you call a romance where the main character dies from cancer? I would say that's just fiction. And that's fine. Like, you can just do that, but just don't market it as a romance. And then it could be the type of fiction that it is could be developed, depending on what other stories what other elements are in your story. If it's about a woman's journey, well, it's not if it's not the main character, then I was going to say, if it's a woman, it could be a woman's fiction, but it would be just a fiction story, and then you would figure out like what the other elements of that story are. It's totally okay to have that, but just don't call it a romance, was the thing I was worried about. Rachel asked, can tropes be effectively subverted to enhance author's unique voice? Yes. Or do they inherently? No, I don't believe they compromise artistic authenticity or a fleeting trend, because I think that tropes are rooted in common human relationships and emotions that have lasted a really long time. At least this is my opinion on it. You can have your own. I'm just giving you mine. So it's the development of the trope. So like the idea of the wicked stepmother, like that has been around for a super long time, and I would say that's a cliche. But we seem to like that because we keep seeing it again and again, right? It's back in those fairy tales that we've had for hundreds of years, and probably even before that, it was probably in like oral storytelling, because there's always been things that's happened where there's families have had to reform. So then, but it's just the tropes can help you develop how you want to make that more than just very just kind of flat characters of like, oh, the evil stepmother. I mean, it'd be great to write a story where like she's the protagonist and like what's her side of things, so that's just kind of my impression of tropes, is that they're like these long lasting elements of human communication and emotion. How do you know if you have underwritten a trope you wanted to use? Beats in extra genres, but tropes there seem to be a gray area. Great question. I think a lot of times it's easier to have somebody else help you figure out what the trope is, because a lot of storytellers use them intuitively. So it's really helpful if you're telling your story to somebody else. This is what my story's about. Another storyteller person can usually help you. A lot of times I've had people say, oh, I only have like 2 tropes in my story. I'm like, well, tell me about your story. It's like, oh, they've got tons of tropes in there, which is great because there's like lots of little hooks to get people into the story. So one of the best ways, I think, is really talking about it or sharing with somebody else to figure out what you have in there. The other thing is, if you don't want to do it that way, setting it aside and then going back and looking at it with fresh eyes. But I think it's really hard to like look at your own work and think of it like, what are the actual elements and how they're moving when you're like in the day-to-day, or when you're like deep in the trenches of it. Yes, and I think like how you develop the tropes is a gray area, but that's also like the awesomeness about it because that's what keeps them from being um all the same, you know. So if then you don't then we're not like talking about like all best friend like say for example enemies to lovers. So that's super important because of the underlying tension in that story and all the conflict that those relationships have to bear. But they're not all exactly the same, right? There's like, okay, we know they start out with conflict and that they're going to wind up in the end, but that the differences of how those stories are developed is what keeps it really strong and why people still want to read those. Rachel said, oh shoot, I lost it. How does an author get away with mixing tropes that normally would never be combined? How can that be marketed? I think again you need to know what your genre is. That's really important to know like what your story's questions are. I think that there's really great stuff going on with some things that I really like that are different and fresh ways of using tropes are if you see there's like a resurgence of these kind of cozy tropes that involve multi-generational characters. So think Murderers in the Building, the Ted Danson one, whose name I can't think of right now, and the Thursday Murder Book Club, which is going to be made into a movie. So all of a sudden we're seeing this kind of resurgence of murder, mystery, cozy things, but in environments where you have different age groups. And so I think that's a really interesting way of playing with tropes where it's not like just young people and like this grizzled detective who are doing the crime solving. I think that's an interesting way that tropes are being played with. There's a really neat thing going on in domestic horror, which I love, where you have like mothers dealing with issues of monsters and the less heroic elements of motherhood, which I think has just absolutely wonderful. One example is Sundial by Catriona Ward. Read that book if you're curious about what are ways that you can play with tropes. Let me think what else. And I'm trying to think of any other ones. I personally, somebody asked me in there, I think, I love new applications of the amnesia trope. I am like always on the lookout for those because I feel like the amnesia trope is a trope that we see traditionally be used as like somebody gets a bonk on the head, they forget stuff, and then they conveniently remember, their memories when they're in other relationships and things have progressed. But we're kind of living in this renaissance of, I believe the amnesia trope. Severance is a fantastic example of tropes as relationships and the whole idea of memory and power. I can't like talk about that enough. I just love the storytelling of amnesia with that. I just read a fantastic book, Karen Russell's book called The Antidote, which is fantastic, tons of stuff going on in there, but she has another way of using tropes in an interesting way. It's specifically, the amnesia trope. I loved that in there. So there's lots of really cool stuff happening. It's just a matter of like going out and looking and reading it. Tropes that are overused. I think it's not so much overused. It's like that they're just not developed into unique enough characters. So I mean, I still love enemies to lovers, but I just want them to be like characters that are like, oh, that's different. I never thought about that. So so they have a lot of conflict in their stories and in their character. That's how I think we prevent them from being overused. Does embracing tropes and romanticy risk homogenizing authors' unique voice and styles, and should writers prioritize authenticity over trend-driven tropes, or tropes a timeless storytelling tool? Yeah, I kind of answered that before. It's a good question. I think they're a timeless storytelling tool, but you need to use your author voice to develop them, and that's how you prevent them from all sounding alike. So I think that's what I think is super important about that. Various folks in the chat. Braided, yes, twisting tropes like making a braid. I totally think about that. Let's see. A part of writing challenge, picked a subgenre. I hated most of 5 tropes. That's so cool. Studying them, and that is great. That is a really great that's a really great exercise. I love that you did that. Right, but you've I think that you, by twisting them, you're playing with them, and I think that's what's the important thing about it. Cozy and spicy. Yeah, so you got to check out Stephanie's series to see how she did that. That was really cool. Well, I guess I could say, Rachel, the thing with Stephanie's, she's the reason why she's been so successful. She's given readers the cozy mystery that they really want. They're mysteries that are placed in a bookshop, but the relationships of the women in these series are spicy, that they're having as they're solving the mysteries. So I think it's just and her I know that her series has been super successful because she started out doing them indie and doing very, very well. And she was actually contacted by, I think it was Simon and Schuster. Anyway, now she's trad published with them. So like she was able to like identify this niche and like put these two things together, which is pretty cool. And I think that's kind of a neat way to check out how she markets it. It's Steph Green, Stephanie Holmes. So just to kind of see how how she does that. A baker, so there are recipes at the end of several of my books. Oh yes, that's really important to make sure if you're doing a mystery and it's all about baking, and you had, that's an essential thing about it, but it's a reader expectation that you've done that, and that you talk about that. That's really important. My latest book is about a band, and most chapters start with lyrics from their songs. Oh, cool. Did I miss anybody else's burning questions? You can also track me down at Jennifer@jenniferhilt.com to ask me some questions, and I will work on re-recording this and putting it up on this trope channel, and then I'll figure out a way that I can try to make sure that the AWC people have the right ones. I really appreciate you guys sticking with me through all the technical stuff, because it's so I've done like so many of these on Google through Zoom, and then uploaded them and stuff like that. But the live in this particular way is a little challenging with the format. So yeah, I guess the biggest thing I can just encourage you guys is to read and watch and think about how this story was put together. What are the tropes in there? How did they use it? What do I like? What don't I like? How would I do it differently? You could just add a comment. Oh, okay, later for this video for the other. Okay. Oh, thank you. I really appreciate everybody's participation and patience with me, and thank you so much to the moderators for sticking in here and doing all this. So, oh, cool. And then there's a first page critique coming up next. Okay, awesome. Okay, guys. Well, I'm gonna figure out how to, excuse me, have something to drink, and tracking my own tropes is a problem for me. Yeah, it is. Of course, just feel free to try my first book and see what you think. But ask a friend, or somebody else who's knowledgeable about it. Like, what do you think are the tropes in here? So yeah. Well, thanks everybody. I hope you have a great conference. There's so much good stuff going on in here. They've really put together a wonderful time. So I will try to make sure that I have all this information for you guys soon. Thank you so much, and good luck. And don't be afraid to play with tropes and experiment with them and all that good stuff out there.